She kicked out her black adoptive father. Days later, $15 million was found in his old suitcase. In the pristine quiet of suburban respectability, a daughter's choice between love and social advancement creates wounds that run deeper than blood or law. Rebecca Morrison's decision to remove her adoptive father Samuel from her carefully curated life reflects pressures that transform gratitude into shame, authentic connection into social liability. When his gentle dignity meets her harsh rejection, their separation carries the weight of 23 years of unconditional love, confronting the seductive power of belonging to spaces that demand the sacrifice of those who matter most. Sometimes the most profound discoveries await in the silence after we've lost what we never fully appreciated while we had the chance to choose differently. Rebecca Morrison stood in the doorway of her pristine suburban home, watching her adoptive father Samuel gather his belongings with the quiet dignity that had characterized his every action for 23 years. At 31, she had built a life of careful respectability, corporate law career, wealthy husband, social circles that valued appearance over authenticity. The argument that had led to this moment had been simmering for months, fueled by her husband Derek's subtle comments about Samuel's presence affecting their image, about how having an elderly black man in their guest room might impact Derek's political aspirations. Samuel had raised her from age 8 with infinite patience and love, but Rebecca's current life required a different narrative, one where her origins remained carefully obscured. The space between them now felt vast, measured not in feet but in the distance she had traveled from the child who had once clung to his gentle hands. Samuel moved through the familiar rooms with careful precision, his weathered fingers touching surfaces he had helped maintain for over 2 decades. At 74, his body carried the stories of a lifetime spent in service to others, first as a young man working construction to support his late wife, then as a single adoptive father who had transformed his grief into love for a broken child who needed belonging more than blood. He had never spoken about his past in detail, preferring to focus on Rebecca's future, but his quiet strength had provided the foundation upon which she had built every achievement. Tonight, as he folded his few possessions into the same battered suitcase he had carried when he first brought her home, Samuel's heart broke not for himself, but for the woman his beloved daughter had become, someone who had learned to value perception over love, status over connection. The conversation that had shattered their relationship replayed in Rebecca's mind with growing discomfort. Each harsh word she had spoken feeling more foreign to her true nature with every repetition. "I need space to build my own life," she had said, the words borrowed from Derek's vocabulary rather than emerging from her own heart. Having you here complicates things with Derek's career, with our social obligations. People ask questions I don't know how to answer. The cruelty of reducing their relationship to social inconvenience had been evident even as she spoke, but pride and fear had driven her forward past the point where she could gracefully retreat. Samuel had listened without argument, his eyes reflecting hurt that cut deeper than anger, his response carrying the love that made her rejection even more devastating. "I understand, sweetheart. I just want you to be happy." Derek watched from the living room with satisfaction poorly disguised as concern, his political calculations having successfully eliminated what he viewed as an obstacle to their upward trajectory. He had spent months planting seeds of doubt about Samuel's place in their carefully curated life, suggesting that Rebecca's professional advancement required distance from reminders of her non-traditional background. The manipulation had been subtle but persistent, designed to make Rebecca feel that choosing Samuel meant choosing limitations rather than love. As Samuel prepared to leave the only home he had known for over 2 decades, Derek's victory felt hollow even to him, though he pushed aside the discomfort in favor of imagined future benefits. The house would return to its pristine perfection, but something essential would be missing, something that had made their marriage feel human rather than merely strategic. The days after Samuel's departure stretched like wounds that refused to heal, each familiar routine now highlighting his absence in ways that made Rebecca question every decision that had led to this moment. Her morning coffee tasted different without his gentle presence reading the newspaper at the kitchen table, their quiet conversations about everything and nothing having provided a grounding she hadn't realized she depended upon. The guest room stood empty but somehow accusatory, its perfect cleanliness unable to erase the memory of Samuel's careful habits, his books arranged just so, his reading glasses always placed precisely on the nightstand. Rebecca found herself avoiding that part of the house, as if physical distance could somehow diminish the emotional weight of what she had done to the man who had given her everything when she had nothing. Derek's satisfaction with their restored privacy felt increasingly jarring against Rebecca's growing awareness of what they had lost. His comments about their improved social positioning, about how much easier entertaining would be without having to explain Samuel's presence, began to sound less like practical observations and more like revelations of character that made her uncomfortable. She had married Derek for his ambition and social connections, appreciating his drive and the lifestyle his success provided. But Samuel's absence revealed aspects of her husband's personality that had been easier to ignore when balanced by her father's steady presence. The house felt sterile now, beautiful but cold, lacking the warmth that comes from unconditional love and authentic connection rather than strategic alliance and mutual benefit. Samuel had moved into a modest apartment across town, his transition managed with the same quiet competence that had characterized his approach to every challenge throughout his life. He established new routines, morning walks in the nearby park, volunteer work at the community center, careful management of his limited savings to ensure independence that wouldn't burden the daughter who had chosen to separate from him. His hurt ran deep, but it coexisted with understanding born from decades of observing how society pressured people to choose conformity over connection, how the pursuit of acceptance could lead to the rejection of those who loved most deeply. He had seen Rebecca struggle with questions of identity and belonging throughout her adolescence, and recognized that her current choices emerged from fears he had hoped love could overcome but apparently hadn't fully healed. The silence between them stretched across the city like a bridge neither knew how to cross, pride and pain creating barriers that love alone couldn't immediately dissolve. Rebecca's friends and colleagues remained unaware of the change in her household, their conversations proceeding as if nothing fundamental had shifted in her world. Yet she found herself distracted during important meetings, her usual sharp focus blunted by the persistent ache of loss that no professional achievement could address. Samuel's absence created a vacancy that extended far beyond physical space, revealing how completely his presence had been woven into the fabric of her daily life. Her sense of security, her understanding of what home actually meant when stripped of superficial decoration and reduced to its essential elements of care and belonging. The call came on a Tuesday morning when Rebecca was reviewing contracts that suddenly seemed less important than anything had in weeks. Samuel's neighbor, Mrs. Chun, spoke with the careful formality of someone delivering news that would reshape reality in ways she couldn't fully comprehend. "There's been an accident," she said gently, explaining that Samuel had collapsed while helping elderly residents at the community center, his heart finally giving way under the accumulated weight of decades spent caring for others while asking little in return. The paramedics said it was quick, peaceful. He was conscious briefly and asked me to call you. The words struck Rebecca like physical blows, each detail of Samuel's final moments revealing the depth of love that had persisted despite her rejection. His last thoughts focused on her welfare rather than his own pain or disappointment. Racing to the hospital felt like traveling backward through time, each mile returning her to earlier versions of herself. The corporate lawyer dissolving into the college student he had supported through law school, then the teenager he had guided through first heartbreaks and academic challenges, finally arriving as the 8-year-old girl who had found safety in his gentle presence when her world had collapsed around foster care and abandonment. The corridor outside the emergency room became a space of reckoning where Rebecca confronted the magnitude of what she had lost, not just in Samuel's death, but in the precious weeks they could have shared if she had chosen love over image, authenticity over acceptance. The fluorescent lights seemed harsh and unforgiving as she processed the reality that their last conversation would forever be marked by her cruelty rather than his goodness. Derek's arrival at the hospital revealed the poverty of their relationship in ways that Rebecca was only beginning to understand. His concern focused on managing the situation's impact on his political aspirations rather than offering comfort for her genuine grief. His questions about funeral arrangements driven by social considerations rather than emotional support. "We'll need to be careful about the service," he said quietly, his voice carrying calculations about attendance and public perception that made Rebecca feel physically ill. The contrast between Derek's strategic thinking and Samuel's unconditional love became impossible to ignore, forcing recognition that she had traded authentic connection for social advancement that now felt worthless in the face of irreplaceable loss. The apartment Samuel had lived in for barely 3 weeks felt like an archaeological site of abandoned dreams and deferred hopes, each carefully arranged possession telling stories of a life lived with dignity despite limited resources. His books revealed intellectual curiosity that had never diminished despite lack of formal education, his volunteer schedules showing commitment to community service that had continued even after Rebecca's rejection. In the bedroom closet, Mrs. Chun pointed to the old suitcase that had accompanied Samuel through every major transition of his life, its worn corners and faded fabric speaking of journeys taken with hope despite uncertainty. "He always kept important papers in there," she explained gently, understanding that Rebecca would need to manage practical details while processing emotional devastation that would take years to fully comprehend. Inside Samuel's suitcase lay documents that revealed a life of extraordinary complexity and hidden sacrifice that Rebecca had never imagined possible. Bank statements showed not the modest savings she had expected, but accumulated wealth that had grown steadily over decades through careful investment and disciplined financial management. The numbers seemed impossible at first. $15 million distributed across various accounts, investment portfolios managed with sophistication that spoke of deep understanding of financial markets and long-term planning. Stock certificates dated back to Samuel's early career showed prescient investments in companies that had grown exponentially, while savings bonds revealed decades of consistent deposits that had compounded into substantial wealth through patience and strategic thinking that belied assumptions about his capabilities and background. The letters provided context that transformed Rebecca's understanding of Samuel's entire life story, revealing chapters he had never shared despite their decades together. Correspondence with financial advisors discussed his intentions to leave everything to Rebecca, his investment strategies designed to provide security for her future while maintaining the modest lifestyle that had characterized his daily existence. Legal documents outlined scholarship funds he had established for foster children, community center renovations he had quietly funded, medical bills he had paid for neighbors who couldn't afford treatment. The man who had lived so simply had accumulated wealth not for personal luxury, but for the ability to care for others, his every financial decision guided by love rather than personal gain or material comfort. Most devastating were the handwritten letters Samuel had never sent. Messages addressed to Rebecca that chronicled his thoughts and feelings throughout their relationship, his pride in her achievements, his understanding of the pressure she faced, his forgiveness for choices that had hurt him but which he recognized emerged from pain rather than malice. "My dearest daughter," one recent letter began, "I understand why you needed space, and I want you to know that my love for you has never diminished despite the distance between us. I hope someday you'll find peace with who you are and where you came from, because you are everything I could have hoped for in a child." The words carried such gentle wisdom and unconditional acceptance that Rebecca felt the careful walls she had built around her heart begin to crumble completely. The final document was Samuel's will, updated just days before his death, leaving everything to Rebecca with notes explaining his hopes for how the inheritance might be used. His vision included educational opportunities for disadvantaged youth, support for foster care programs, and investments in community development that would honor the values he had tried to instill throughout her upbringing. The legacy he left was more than financial. It was a roadmap for transformation, an opportunity to reconnect with the person she had been before fear and social pressure had led her to prioritize appearance over authenticity, status over service, acceptance over love. Samuel's final gift was not just wealth, but the chance to rebuild her life on foundations of purpose rather than pretense. The funeral service became a revelation of Samuel's true impact on his community, drawing hundreds of people whose lives he had touched through quiet acts of service and generosity that Rebecca had never fully understood. Former foster children spoke of his mentorship, elderly neighbors described his practical help during difficult times. Community leaders acknowledged donations that had kept vital programs running during budget crises. Each testimony revealed another dimension of the man she thought she knew completely, showing her that Samuel's influence had extended far beyond their household into networks of care and support that had flourished through his investment in human dignity rather than social advancement. The service became both celebration of his life and mirror reflecting the poverty of her own recent choices. Derek's behavior during the funeral provided final confirmation of the fundamental differences in their values and character that Samuel's absence had begun to reveal. His focus remained on managing appearances rather than honoring grief, his comments about attendees revealing dismissive attitudes toward the community members who had come to pay respects to Samuel's memory. "This is good actually," he whispered during the service, his political calculations reducing Samuel's death to networking opportunity rather than human loss. The callousness of his response crystallized Rebecca's growing understanding that their marriage had been built on shared ambition rather than shared values, convenience rather than connection, image rather than authentic love and mutual support. The conversation with Samuel's lawyer the following week felt like receiving instructions for rebuilding her entire life from foundations she had forgotten existed. The inheritance came with moral weight that transcended its financial value, representing Samuel's faith in her capacity for growth and his hope that wealth could become a tool for healing rather than continued separation from authentic community. His specific requests about scholarship funds and community investments reflected values he had tried to teach her throughout their relationship, that true security came from connection rather than accumulation, that happiness emerged from service rather than status, that the most meaningful achievements were measured by their positive impact on others rather than personal advancement or social recognition. Rebecca's return to Samuel's apartment to collect his remaining belongings became a pilgrimage through memories that had taken on new meaning in light of his hidden generosity and unconditional love. Each book, each photograph, each carefully preserved memento told stories of quiet sacrifice and persistent hope that had shaped her own possibilities even when she had been too self-absorbed to recognize them. The modest surroundings that had once embarrassed her now seemed like evidence of character rather than limitation, proof of someone who had chosen substance over style, meaning over materialism, authentic relationships over superficial social advancement. The apartment became sacred space where she began to remember who she had been before fear had convinced her to choose conformity over connection. 6 months after Samuel's death, Rebecca stood in the community center that had been renovated with funds from his hidden generosity, watching children whose lives were being changed by scholarships he had established decades before his passing. The space buzzed with activity that reflected his vision of education as pathway to opportunity, mentorship as foundation for growth, and community investment as source of sustainable change. She had left Derek, understanding finally that their relationship had been built on shared ambition rather than shared values, that true partnership required mutual respect for character rather than mutual benefit from social positioning. The divorce had been difficult but necessary, freeing her to rebuild her life on foundations that honored Samuel's teachings rather than society's expectations. Her legal career had taken new direction as well, shifting from corporate advancement to advocacy for foster care reform and educational equity, areas where Samuel's influence had always been strongest, but which she had never recognized as worthy of professional attention. The work felt more meaningful than any contract negotiation or merger facilitation, connecting her daily activities to values that had been dormant rather than absent throughout her corporate climbing. Her colleagues questioned the career change, unable to understand why someone would leave lucrative corporate practice for nonprofit advocacy. But Rebecca had learned to measure success differently, focusing on impact rather than income, purpose rather than prestige, connection rather than competition. The scholarship program she had expanded in Samuel's memory had already supported dozens of foster children pursuing higher education, their achievements creating ripple effects of positive change that extended far beyond individual advancement. Each scholarship recipient carried forward Samuel's belief in human potential regardless of background or circumstances, their success proving that investment in education and character could overcome almost any obstacle when combined with unwavering support and authentic care. The program had become living memorial to Samuel's values, demonstrating that true wealth lay in the ability to nurture others' possibilities rather than accumulate personal advantages or social recognition. Most significantly, Rebecca had begun volunteering at the foster care agency, where Samuel had first encountered her case 23 years earlier, her experience bringing unique perspective to children facing the same challenges of identity and belonging that had once seemed insurmountable. Her presence offered proof that love could overcome any background, that chosen family could be stronger than biological connection, that the wounds of abandonment could heal when met with patience and authentic care. Each child she mentored carried forward Samuel's legacy of transformation, their healing becoming testament to his enduring influence and evidence that the most profound changes occurred through patient investment in human dignity rather than dramatic gestures or public recognition. Years later, Rebecca often returned to Samuel's grave carrying flowers and stories of the lives that continued to be transformed through his hidden generosity and enduring example. The modest headstone bore simple inscription, "Beloved Father, devoted servant, faithful friend." But the true monument to his life existed in the scholarship recipients pursuing dreams once thought impossible, the community programs that continued flourishing through his financial support, and the countless individuals who had learned to see possibility where others saw only limitation. His influence had multiplied exponentially since his death, touching lives that would never know his name, but would benefit forever from his commitment to human dignity and educational opportunity. The woman Rebecca had become bore little resemblance to the person who had once prioritized image over authenticity, status over service, social acceptance over genuine love. Her apartment, modest by her previous standards but rich in meaningful relationships and purposeful work, felt more like home than the suburban mansion she had shared with Derek ever had. The walls displayed photos of scholarship recipients and thank you letters from families whose lives had been changed by programs Samuel had supported, evidence of impact that transcended financial measurement and spoke to the kind of success that created meaning rather than merely accumulating recognition or material advantage. Her current relationship with Marcus, a social worker whose values aligned with her transformed understanding of what mattered most in life, was built on shared commitment to service rather than social advancement, mutual respect for character rather than mutual benefit from status positioning. Their conversations focused on ways to expand educational opportunities and community support systems, their dreams involving positive change rather than personal advancement, their partnership demonstrating that authentic connection required courage to be vulnerable rather than strategic to be impressive. The relationship honored Samuel's example of choosing love over convenience, depth over superficiality, authentic connection over socially acceptable but emotionally hollow alliance. Most importantly, Rebecca had learned to see Samuel's final gift not as financial inheritance, but as permission to live authentically, to choose connection over convention, to measure success by positive impact rather than social recognition. His $15 million had become foundation for transformation that extended far beyond monetary value, creating opportunities for healing, growth, and service that honored his memory while creating positive change for generations to come. The suitcase that had revealed his hidden generosity remained in her apartment as a reminder that the most profound wealth often traveled in humble packages, that true security came from love freely given rather than status carefully cultivated, and that the most meaningful legacies were built through patient investment in human potential rather than accumulation of personal advantages that ultimately proved hollow when measured against the enduring power of authentic human connection. Samuel's hidden fortune became more than inheritance. It became invitation to remember that true wealth lies in the courage to love authentically, to see beyond surface appearances, to recognize the extraordinary generosity of ordinary people. His legacy transformed Rebecca's understanding that the most valuable gifts often come wrapped in humble packages, carried by hands that have known struggle but chosen grace. In a world that measures worth by accumulation, their story reminds us that the richest inheritance is the example of someone who chose service over status, connection over convention, love over everything else, that ultimately proves temporary when measured against the enduring power of authentic human bonds.